I'll say that William pretty much did my entire lesson this morning. So, what the topic is God's principles in everyday life. God's principles are a lot like the wisdom, like wisdom in Proverbs. They're everywhere. They're all around us. We'll get to the verses, but I start Proverbs chapter 1, 20 and 21, and then chapter 8, 1 through 3. They are everywhere around us. We may not notice them all the time, just because we don't recognize the situation. Unless we're meditating on God's word and we're familiar with what God's word. We may see a situation of God's principle in action, but we won't notice it, or we won't realize it for what it is. But in Proverbs, chapter 1, 21 and 22, it says, "Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the opening of the gates in the city. She uttereth her words, saying," and then she goes on about her wisdom. And also in Proverbs 8, 1 through 3, it says, "Doth not wisdom cry, and understanding put forth her voice? She standeth at the top of high places, by the way in the places of the path. She crieth at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in at the doors." And in the streets, that's the open places or the plazas in the city. That's where everybody was. There's always people around there. The chief place of the concourses, that's the important places of the city. They conducted a lot of business in the open air city. So, these were the places where they would meet, whether it's conducive for meeting there or what, or maybe it was just all, tradition. That's where they always met. But, that's where wisdom was at, to say, hey, I'm trying to teach you stuff. Openings of the gates. Every city in those times, they had great walls, and they had gates everywhere. For, wherever a gate was, that was a choke point into the city. So everybody had to go through gates. So wisdom is there. Metaphorically speaking, I am at the gates, at the coming in of the city, or the going out of the city. Wisdom is there crying and saying. Same thing with God's principles. They are there crying and saying, hey, here is here is the principle. That you couldn't ignore them. Well, you could if you really wanted to. Also, chapter 8, it says about top of high places. You can really carry your voice. If somebody was standing on top of the church steeple and started crying, they can be heard for quite a ways. Wisdom is up there, just like God's principles. They're being yelled out around. Places of the paths. The places is a word for houses or dwelling. Wisdom is wisdom is like up and down your sidewalk, yelling and saying, hey, here's God's principles. Here's what we need you to learn. Coming in at the doors. That's the entrance to a building. You're going down in a business. Wisdom will be right there. God's principles are right there. This is all just the point to say that the principles of God are not hidden. They're all around us. They're not hard to find. And they're not, I got part of this from one of my previous lessons. It's not like it's in the back of a 2-track, way back in some abandoned house, and then somebody's forgotten property. It's out and about. And just because somebody doesn't believe or recognize the principle does not stop it. As they like to say in the courts, ignorance is no excuse of the law. There's no excuse for the law. If you don't know it, doesn't matter. The principle is still going to work on your life. Just try ignoring gravity sometime and see how far that goes. Some of the principles. Proverbs 13:10. "Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom." How many of you ever heard of road rage? That's all pride. You got people that, I am offended by whatever you did, and my offended pride means I've got to retaliate. I had jury duty once, and the whole reason we were there was because of pride. Two guys were given 2 tickets by cops, and their pride, they're angry because the cops gave them tickets. And if they had swallowed their pride, not had any pride with it, they could have gone in, and the judge told us right there, both of those tickets were invalid. They could have got them all thrown out. But because of their pride, got them into contention. They ended up, getting charged with assault on a cop, fleeing the scene. They were in so much more trouble because of their pride. The next one, Proverbs 14:35. The king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him that causes shame. I read in a book one time, they call this the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not embarrass thy boss. Anyone who has ever been in a job knows this, has seen this. And it's a principle of God. If you do well for your boss, you're a hard worker and your boss can depend on you, he will have the favor towards you. Like my boss has put me on several things that, they're getting to be more important because he can depend on me. But I guarantee you, if I embarrass him a couple times, what he gives me is going to start going down, and it's going to reflect on, on my position and such like that. Next principle, we have the Good Samaritan laws that have been passed. Where did they get that name from? Well, that's the parable that Jesus gave. And what is the purpose of these types of laws? Is to legally protect people who are making a good faith effort to help someone in need, just like the Good Samaritan in the parable. The world uses this phrase, the Good Samaritan laws, the Good Samaritan, but they probably don't realize where it comes from and what it all means. And the Good Samaritan parable was when the lawyer trying to justify himself by saying, "Who is my neighbor?" which is from from the story or the commandments of the second great commandment, to love thy neighbor as thyself. So the whole principle of the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself, that all goes down to the Good Samaritan. The world doesn't recognize that. I mean, I guarantee you, a lot of people, if they truly, the world truly understood what it meant, it'd be like, well, we got to find something different here because we can't use anything that says Bible or Bible related. I mean, that's just anti-Bible. The next one, Galatians 6:7, be not deceived, God is not mocked, and for whatsoever man soweth, that shall he reap. We've brought that up many times before. The sowing and reaping. You sow. The one I like to use downstairs a lot for kids is our driving habits. We got some. We see it every day driving down, going out, we'll pull out, we'll see somebody blaze around us, or they'll do a rolling stop. And then I tell my kids, I said, you watch somebody like that, and that's somebody that's their pattern, that's their style of driving, and then they'll wonder why they're getting pulled over by the police. They have sown their bad driving habits, and their reaping is either potentially, hopefully not, but that type of driving can lead to accidents, can lead to the government authorities administering fines and tickets. Another sowing and reaping. William brought it up in the message. Unrestrained children. You get a child that's not taught how to control themselves and how to respect others, or in this day and age, they're actively taught to be wild and to disrespect others. Yeah. And when they grow up, what are they? They are an unrestrained adult, and they have no control. And then when somebody tells them no, somebody in a position to actually do something. I mean, we here can tell one of the king's kids, bus kid, hey, you can't do that. And while we're here, we may have a little bit of authority over them. But when they go home, if that's not there, I mean, they don't learn the discipline. They don't learn how to control themselves. They don't learn the God's commandments. When they grow up, their actions will show, how they've been taught as they grow up. Yeah. Pastor just went over this last Wednesday, but next one is Proverbs 4:18. But the path of the just is as a shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness, they know not what they stumble. These one I title as people who are surprised when they get caught. The Psalms 119 says, thy word is a light unto my path. Chris Knapp would have a lesson down in King's Kids where he'd say, imagine the floor is covered all with mouse traps and I've got to walk through it on bare feet. If it's all dark and I've got to walk through this, he said, I'm in for a world of pain and I'm not going to know it until I step in it. He says, but if I've got a light, I can shine it in front of my feet and I can see what's there and I can avoid the trap. Those that, they say, as the verse says, the wicked, they wonder how they get caught because they don't see they don't think what they're doing is wrong, or they think they'll get away with it. The pastor we had in Morley, one of his sayings I like to use is, everybody thinks they're the exception. Everybody thinks it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to get caught. And then, everybody else is looking at him going, duh, what do you think is going to happen when you do this? I mean, sooner or later, it's going to catch up to you. Also, the Proverbs 27:12 in relation to this is, the prudent man foreseeth the evil. His way is not in darkness. He can see somebody's, and it's really easy to see, it goes also to the mote in the eye, the mote and the beam in the eye, because it's real easy to see somebody else's life. That's just the way we are. Sometimes it's really hard to be, to self-judge ourselves and look and say, okay, yes, I have this problem. But it's real easy to look to see somebody else's life and say, okay, what they're doing, yeah, that's going to cause some problems. And that's going to cause, they're going to have problems. And the second part of the verse 12 or 27:12 says, but the simple pass on and are punished. So the prudent man, he saw, okay, this situation is going to cause some sort of evil or catastrophe. But I can see this ahead of time. This is God's principles working, as they say, I can see this and I can withdraw. A pastor says, you can use your experience or somebody else's experience. And if you use somebody else's experience, okay, somebody else has done this before, they've gotten in trouble, or they've had this trial in their life. If I refrain from doing this activity, then I'm no longer, I can refrain, I don't have to suffer this trial or experience. But those that do not know or are willfully ignorant will go on and just, basically plow ahead and suffer the consequences. So those are just a few of God's principles that work in everyday life. And I said, regardless of whether or not we believe them, whether or not we know of them, and whether or not we agree with them, they are there and they are working regardless of what we think or want.
Amen.